You're listening to What We Lost podcast. On this episode, entitled Life, the Real Penguins, the Peaches of Immortality, the Fountain of Youth, the Real Dr. Frankenstein, and the Piltdown Man, please subscribe and enjoy. Thank you.
Welcome to the What We Lost podcast. I'm your host Rob, with his two co-hosts Luke and Steve, experts in history, paranormal, and ufology, and everything under the sun that has to do with cryptids, as well as everything related to the strange. Welcome to the inaugural episode of this podcast. This podcast is dedicated to the pursuit of knowledge and discussing what we have lost in the ages, such as animals, artifacts, explorers, expeditions, scientific research some may find controversial, and people that have directly affected the world. This is the primary objective of this podcast, as well as current scientific news. We will also discuss paranormal, cryptids, and other things mysterious. But these overall subjects will have an overall objective on this show, so this is not a conspiracy show as much as it is giving you the concrete evidence and the facts in the pursuit of knowledge, and we will be also debunking some of these claims. Facts first, speculations second. So welcome all our listeners to What We Lost podcast, and we're going to dive into our first subject of the night, which is the real Dr. Frankenstein.
Mary Wollstonecraft Shelley was an English novelist who wrote the Gothic novel, Frankenstein, the story of a doctor who created a monster by the use of electricity. The novel was later loosely turned into the classic 1931 film Frankenstein. After some damning evidence was uncovered, it was found that Shelley had actually tried many of the experiments on her pet dog, Richard. In one particular article in the Journal of Transplantation, 1821, Shelley explained how she had used general anesthetic on Richard to knock him out, then butchered him, swapping his limbs, before bringing him back to life.
Many were perplexed about how this woman could write such a dangerous, scary, monstrous story with scientists that had genetic research, all these things, and she was never privy to that. Yet when they now, some recent evidence has come out that says she was actually more closer to her work than many think. This was actually done by her biographers, and it was said that it was an article in which she published in the Journal of Transplantation in 1821. She explained how she had used general anesthetics on her pet pooch to knock him out. And what she did, she actually was doing many different experiments herself on her pet dog, which was named Richard. Yes. And the dog was supposedly, butchered with limbs replaced, with cat parts, and she reportedly felt so bad for her dog Richard, she let it live out in the shed for the remainder of his days by feeding him, scraps and everything like that, keeping him alive till he couldn't live anymore. And it just kind of goes to show you. And she and I should also mention too, she was a big, huge fan at the time of the debate between whether electricity could be used to bring back the body. There was once a huge debate in medical research whether the body could actually be regenerated with electricity. A lot of people said no, when the body's dead, it's dead. But many thought the body was kind of like a giant battery. It could just be recharged. And she was a huge proponent of that. And doing all this, she felt so bad that it's even said to honor her dog's memory is she wrote Frankenstein, and that's how the idea of it was born, from all this research that she did on her own dog.
That's interesting. So the idea is she was involved with some form of you know, the early forms of, cell, basically what we call now like cell regeneration, or, just surgery or things like this, using you know, electric shocks and all that. Um, and that was on her dog, so that's where she was drawn to it. And hence why she wrote Frankenstein. Then, correct?
Correct.
Okay, I can see that. Was it during this time? I don't think it was. No, no, no. Maybe I'm mistaken, but like this was also during that period of time when, um, because of the expansion of medical science, like they needed more cadavers, and so there was
Right.
a dearth of corpses too.
Hmm.
So it
He
was like
was
this weird. It was that weird period of time because there weren't enough corpses, so it started a whole black market of grave robbery.
Yeah.
Uh, until I think I forget the exact, but like a set of very famous criminals started making money by just actively killing
Burke
people.
and Harris, who you're
Burke and
speaking
Harris.
of
Who
1823. They were
that
known to be they did a rash of grave robbing, and they were also known to be murderers.
yeah, and the case was so public that basically moved towards what we have, generally now a system of body donation for science.
Right. And I would also like to mention uh, her husband Percy Shelley, who was Percy Bysshe Shelley, I should say, who was also her husband at age 16. He was actually also a huge, kind of a, I guess you could say, like as you said, a medical research enthusiast. He
Yeah,
basically didn't. He dabbled in the science. He wasn't a profession in it, but he had access to all these tools that gave Mary Shelley the ability to do this to her own dog
and,
as well.
yeah, and a very famous, I think not necessarily a proponent of atheism at the time, but uh, very famous anti-religious writer, Percival Blythe Shelley. Uh,
Right.
so And then there was the story, and then of course there's the famous story of when it first started. When it was like a summer getaway. It was Mary Shelley, Percival Shelley, and then Lord Byron in a
Right.
and I think like yeah, Byron was in his 20s by that point, and Mary Shelley told the story of Frank like that was where she first penned it. Um, as far as the famous story is basically so that because Byron wanted to fuck her, and so she just kept telling the story of Frankenstein to keep him distracted, so they
Right.
wouldn't fuck. Um, but yeah, so is there anything more to the thing about like the dog, like the
He
dog?
got out at one point in time, and
Uh-huh.
he actually was given to a new owner. He escaped in the streets of Edinburgh
Edinburgh.
because she actually did leave the garden shed open by mistake.
Uh,
He took refuge in the marshes of Arthur's Seat. Um, it looks like he was caught by a hooded passerby who pitied the poor creature and took him in, confused as to how anybody could have been so cruel. So basically, she let the dog out because she was careless or, by accident. Someone picked him up. She didn't really want to take responsibility for it because she didn't want to, anyone to know that she was the one that was
yeah.
doing this to her dog.
Now, when you say they like restitched on limbs, and this dog even able
He
to
grew
move?
into them apparently. Yeah, apparently he was able to like. She only let him out at night.
That's pretty good actually. In
Right.
terms of like limb transplant, if you were like restitching a limb onto like that's something we can do, but it's not something
She
we've done.
literally used electricity, which had been harnessed from a recent storm, and stored in a dual element electric tank. She passed shock waves through the limbs to check, and they were working correctly. And that's
Okay,
yeah.
interesting. Well, it's still pretty fucked up.
She
Uh,
removed his front and hind legs and
so
transplanted them from the front legs of a cat and the hind legs of a young Shetland pony.
What the? Okay, that's fucked up. That is a fucked
Yes.
up looking dog.
And this is the author who wrote Frankenstein.
Yeah.
I mean, for a long time, the idea was always was Frankenstein, based on a true story to the aspect of the scientist and the monster being real. And now
Yeah.
it's more the opposite. It's like, no, the author was the one that was actually
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
mad
Yeah.
scientist. It gives a whole new meaning to the movie Frankenweenie, so to speak.
Frankenweenie, yeah, exactly. Frankenweenie was the secret first story.
Right.
Guys.
Hey, all right, we were
Uh,
just kicking it off a little early here.
All right,
So
cool.
we were discussing Mary Shelley. You got any input on that one, Steve?
The Mary Shelley behind the real Frankenstein story.
Right.
Yeah, other than just the stuff that's been saying in other articles about basically Mary Shelley was kind of, I mean, it's well documented she was a disturbed woman, young woman. And the original concept behind the novel of Frankenstein came from news to me, came from I guess, a real adaptation of what she did to her late dog.
Poor Richard.
Yeah, poor Richard. The story loosely is told as she kept a dog who passed away, and then I guess she was doing experimentations on the dog by, sewing different.
Removing his limbs, yeah. We were
Yeah,
discussing front legs of a cat and the hind legs of a Shetland pony.
right, right. Which is, you know, interesting in and of itself, right? But
yeah, and I mean, I think if it actually is true, then that's like a level. I mean, granted, now that I think about it, it's something most people. I mean, I don't know if that is viable. Like, I would say most biologists or animal
It's
people would be
it
like,
said it was disproportionate and had a real problems walking.
right,
She also took a couple hours
yeah,
to basically resuscitate the dog. She cleaned the cuts with milk and salt, um, and she basically just kept shocking the dog with electro pulses until it basically revived itself.
right, and you can do that almost with any
You
kind
can,
of living thing. Almost, you could do it with a
except the problem
bird.
is that brain cells die
Hmm.
as the body is dead. So she really reduced this poor little dog
yeah,
to nothing.
and
Yeah,
and it's funny because like I believe the like some of the early ideas of what they propose in Frankenstein are actually based off of like untrue facts of science. Like, for example, the idea that hair and fingernails grow after death,
Right.
hmm,
which it doesn't do. Uh, the fingernails they don't grow. The skin just simply recedes on the body. That's why it looks like it grows longer. This yeah, basically the bodies stop growing after death. Um, but I guess if she again, like if it's true that she did actually put cat legs and then pony legs on a dog, and even if it was awkwardly moving, the thing was still somehow able to move, and it wasn't just absolutely dead limbs. That's pretty impressive. I think that's
Right.
like
yeah,
impressive.
yeah.
Even
I'll
if
give
it's
you that.
level, I mean, it's super fucked up.
Hmm.
Uh,
It's just funny to me that, in the quest, as we were talking about on this episode entitled Life here, how we do what we can to bring life back from death, including try these horrendous experiments just to bring us to the, bring things to the brink of death, just to see what the cause and effect is.
Yeah, right. And I feel like that's kind of what it is. It's sort of like, just like Luke was explaining, it's, the whole concept of bleeding after death as well. It's like when you're dead, your arteries don't pump blood to your heart. You actually stop bleeding. So it's a different kind of iteration, especially in this, which is just reanimating a corpse, but like doing it in a way where she's not just reanimating the full dog. She's cutting off limbs and the head and sewing on different body parts to see if she can create an abomination, pretty much.
Right. And, Luke was bringing up, too, how this is reminiscent of the time, too, of Burke and Hare, who delivered bodies to Knox and David Patterson. They were actually the keepers of the medical school. And they were, because medical research was so kind of almost like the in thing at the time. They were so, obsessed with finding things out that they didn't even realize that these bodies they were getting were actually murdered victims. They weren't even just, they were stolen bodies.
Right. Yeah. Grave robbing the bodies of like people that have they're not people that you're going to miss. You know what I mean? Give me the head of a thief. Give me, the mind of a blah, blah, blah rapist or whatever. So it's like when he's reanimated, it's, what do you think is going to happen?
Before then, legally, the only corpses you could work on at the time were executed criminals, which even for Victorian England, or even, I think it wouldn't even be Victorian England, it would be earlier than that. But like even for that time, there just simply was not enough executed criminals for the amount of medical students needed for research at that time, because it was a growing field.
It's really crazy how we do that in life, because it's ironic that for research they didn't care about what was happening. It was all about the research, and they didn't really care about how many bodies they were getting. It reminds me of our next subject we're going to talk about, which is the Great Auk.
The Great Auk, Pinguinus impennis, is a species of flightless alcid that became extinct in the mid-19th century. It was the only modern species in the genus Pinguinus. It bred on rocky, remote islands with easy access to the ocean, and a plentiful food supply, a rarity in nature that provided only a few breeding sites for the great auks. Foraging in the waters of the North Atlantic, ranging as far south as northern Spain and along the coastlines of Canada, Greenland, Iceland, the Faroe Islands, Norway, Ireland, and Great Britain. Its feet and short claws were black, while the webbed skin between the toes was brownish-black. The legs were far back on the bird's body, which gave it powerful swimming and diving abilities.
We know a lot about the dodo bird, and the WWF once they adopted the panda as the symbol of endangered species. But my God, this could easily be making the runner-up. I mean, this is actually the original penguin, and originally its name is actually Penguin impennis. Right, and these are the penguins of the northern hemisphere, and it's interesting because this is the only penguin of the well, actually, it's not even this is the original penguin, but of the species that we know of penguins, they all live within there's Arctic penguins, but penguins for the most part live kind of in contrast to humans, because they live in South Africa, South America, Australia. There's quite a bit of penguins that actually live, and this is actually the penguin that lived in the northern hemisphere, and it's the only one that actually was wiped out, sadly enough.
Yeah, it's a sad tale of the Great Auk. It's one of these things where it's not even that far back, really. The last of its species was wiped out, which is not, in my terminology, that's not far away. That's still within history's reach, where you can trace back the ancestral grounds of something like that, and to have a bird like that basically wiped out and not even really, talked about within the annals of histories of within the animal kingdom. It's like the Great Auk is almost in that dodo bird lane, but it's not technically there yet, where it's kind of like a myth or legend, but
known as well known. I know.
yeah,
And this was a bird that used to be off the coast of Boston. Boston Harbor used to have these
Boston,
birds,
yeah,
and they were essentially just wiped out, not because of uh, they couldn't breed. It was or breed. Well, they made it for life. That's one of the saddest things about these birds is they actually made it for life. So when you killed a pair, that was it. They only laid one egg at a time as well, much like penguins do. The young left the nest site after just 2 to 3 weeks, and but the parents always continue to care for it, as it says. Um, but the bird itself, though, it's really, really sad because in recent years, they had actually taken from the specimens that are in museums, they took the genetic research and they looked at the birds because they were like, maybe the birds were already in decline when humans started to hunt them because their range was so vast, and all of a sudden they just, died off really quickly. And they actually, it's quite sad. From the specimens they did take the DNA evidence from, it turns out that nothing was wrong with the birds. They were actually very well diverse. Their DNA pool was it was healthy. The only thing that took out the Great Auk was the greed of humans. Not only that, but as you were mentioning, Luke, one of the interesting things that led to the bird's decline was museums. Museums had to have they like when the bird was actually being noticed as, hey, this bird is disappearing. They actually museums around the world wanted specimens to be able to display. So they actually hired bounty hunters to go out and kill birds
to
to bring
bring them
them to
because they
bring
were
them back. Right, and
yeah,
it led to even worse decline. So this bird is almost like the ultimate, in my opinion, like example of humans like basically
yeah.
stomping out a species, literally, because the last two mated pair that were found after they killed them, the guy stomped on the egg of the pair, and you literally stomped out the existence of this bird forever.
yeah. Do you think it's weird too, like you mentioned the museums, where there have been articles about this as well, where the museums were desperately trying to seek out the skins of these creatures.
Right.
You know what I mean? To kind of display. It's like,
And fishermen use them for bait. They use their meat for bait. They
mhm.
also ate them. They
Yeah,
use
yeah,
their oil, penguin oil, to light lanterns. And sadly enough, too, like the other so-called penguins, those other penguins or so-called penguins now, um, they were easy to catch because they were flightless. They basically, had a waddle to get away.
Uh,
yeah,
I think it's a very sad story because in recent times too, the famous explorer Forrest Galante, he actually went out looking for the birds in the Faroe Islands, and he's a guy who believes in finding all things that have gone extinct because he believes animals can hide very well from people. But sadly enough, he found nothing, and this is one of the species he actually believes is wiped out by humans. I mean, it's so sad to the point of where we don't even know what this bird sounded like. There's no recorded sound of this bird.
right. Which
I mean,
is interesting to see, like, understand that as well and process that kind of information, because one of the last colonies of these great auks was off the coastline of Iceland. It was surrounded by this volcanic
right,
rocks,
and I was just gonna get to
which
that. They
is
were
like
free,
inhabitable by humans by thousands of miles.
right?
So, when you hear that type of information, obviously, people knew where these birds were, went to where these birds were, and then
Slaughtered them.
slaughtered them for the resources. Or did they? You know what I mean? Like, was it really necessary for you to use the resources of these birds and then wipe them out? Even at that time, I feel like people weren't dumb enough to, you know, wipe out a
And
species
you're
without
talking about
knowing.
the Gerflog, and it's really hard word to say. The Gerfloggers Lasker Island. Um, this was an island that was supposedly uninhabitable, and it was a natural, basically refuge for the birds. But a volcanic eruption sunk it into the ocean,
Yeah,
and it disappeared in 1830, and most of the birds died on the island itself.
Yeah, and that's the thing. It's like, and that can happen to almost any creatures. Polar bears live on ice caps, and then they have to adapt and learn. So these birds also didn't die. You know what I mean? Most of them did, but they had enough know-withal to survive that. It wasn't that. It was just
humans.
Yeah, it was the Isle of Man.
It was our infinite greed
coming over. But was it greed? It's an interesting thing when you say greed, because it's like, well, you're greedy for the resources of this bird. It's the only reason
enterprise.
Yeah. It's like, what else are you doing to exterminate these things? They weren't a threat. You know what I mean? They were just another animal within the food chain. But I don't know, extinguishing it makes it one less. You know what I mean? Something that can come after it, because the resources are negligible.
And what's sad, too, is even though we have specimens in museums, the genetic material that they do have, it is not good enough to make clones of. So this bird is literally gone to the history of the world. It's gone. It will never be, unless new genetic advancements come around, it will never be around again.
Yeah.
What do you think about all that, Luke?
Well, I think the one thing that contrasts this with, say, like the dodo, is because like the dodo had a very delicate balance on its island, that basically disrupted by human interference. Now, obviously, we did a lot of other stuff, but basically the dodo is like considered that by virtue of our just arrival basically signaled the end for the dodo, because it essentially ruined the very, very ideal conditions it had been accustomed to.
Right.
Basically completely wiped out. The Auk was all over North America. It was, realistically, it should have stuck around. Like there were, it was as populous as many other species of flightless birds, mammals, all of that, which of the time we were also using plenty of other creatures for their resources, but it just it just continued to go through. So I do think perhaps there is an aspect of like, clearly there might have been something that contributed to their decline that humans, exacerbated. Because I don't really see, because keep in mind, exploratory humans at that time, the age of sailing and all that, we still are. We're always short-sighted in terms of the environmental stuff. We will just simply take the resource and not consider how far is too far, or how much we take out of it. So we'll never quite know,
Well, here's an interesting thing from the research that they did. So the team modeled, so they took 41 different Great Auks, including the 2 endlings killed in Iceland. They basically modeled different extinction scenarios. For every instance, assume there were 2 million Great Auks in the world. Would the species have gone extinct if people had harvested 9% of the adult birds annually? What about 10%? Along with 5% of the eggs. According to the group's calculation, only 2% harvest rate is reliable, sustainable. The sailors almost outpaced that. And that was said by Dr. Thompson of the research. So sailors were actually outpacing their natural ability to regenerate in the environment.
In general. Which other species have been able to, well, at least at that time, were able to overcome.
This is one of those times where we just literally picked that animal and we're like, all right, we're gonna go after, just like the whales, like, because we almost wiped out the whales.
We almost wiped out the whales, and of course,
same thing.
We intentionally almost wiped out the buffalo, but that was intentional. That was a concentrated effort to wipe out a human species too. So
right.
So if you look at, like, it was bad what we did to the buffaloes, it was worse why we did that to the buffaloes.
Very true.
But there's probably just, I suspect if just normal penguins lived around that area, they would have also probably not gone probably not made us. It's just because they're, less people made their way to Antarctica.
Right.
The Piltdown Man. The Piltdown Man was a paleoanthropological fraud in which bone fragments were presented as the fossilized remains of a previously unknown early human. Although there were doubts about its authenticity virtually from the beginning, when Piltdown Man was unveiled before a meeting of London geologists in 1912, he was heralded as paleoanthropology's missing link. The remains were still broadly accepted for many years, and the falsity of the hoax was only discovered in 1953.
All right, so let's move into another aspect of life that people try to prove, which is the evolution of life. Where does man fit in life itself? Where is he beast, or is he king among the animals? Is he master of his own destiny, or is he just a figment of, or is he just lucky of the genetic reality of history? So with that said, there was actually a group in England comprising of Elliot Smith, Charles Dawson, Arthur Smith Woodward, Arthur Keith, W.P. Pycraft, yes, the guy who actually wrote Sherlock Holmes, and Ray Lankester. And basically, it was in the Piltdown Man quarry site in which they found in 1912, they discovered the missing link. In February of 1912, they contacted Arthur Smith Woodward, the keeper of the geology at Natural History Museum, and basically they said they found a section of human skull from the Pleistocene area in a grave near Piltdown, East Sussex, England. So they went out there and they found a jawbone, more skull fragments, a set of teeth, and primitive tools. And basically, the jawbone seemed to fit in there, and it was exactly what, at the time, they thought a missing link would look like, because they thought we evolved huge brain first, then, we had 8 features. So huge brain, 8 features. So this man, this guy had, this ape had a large brain with the jawbone of an ape, basically.
Yeah.
And basically this finding set off in motion a part of, I want to say, time that was crucially wasted on learning about the evolution of man, because these guys, and they still don't know who is behind the fraud, but Charles Dawson, though, was the man who claimed at the Piltdown gravel site. He was the one that kept finding all these pieces, and then it took 50 years when they were able to date these findings. It turned out that the cranium was actually from a fully developed small brain modern human, and the jawbone itself was from an orangutan. The teeth had been filed down to look more human, and even when they were already under skepticism when the find came out. And they kept even saying, like, Woodward kept saying, hey, all we need is like a canine, all we need is a jawbone. And the guys would kept finding the specific things that he was asking for. And the canine itself too, once it was discovered, the debate was over. It was more human than ape. So the guy basically had, brain of a human, jaw of an ape, the missing link. However, though, later on, as they started researching more and more into human evolution and doing more finds, and they started discovering more and more, basically, human on humans from our past, Neanderthals, everything. And Piltdown Man just didn't seem to fit. They just couldn't, it just didn't make sense. And then it was discovered when they actually did date it that it was a fake. 50 years this thing fooled the world into believing that there was a missing link, when we know now in actually evolution that's not how it works. There is no missing link. The concept is it's a myth.
There's no because evolution does not work in big leaps. It works in small, so that you are not going to see you will see something that you're going to see you'll probably see something that looks between the primate common ancestor we came from to maybe something that looks like between that and a humanish, and then more human-looking stuff. But you'll see, but it'll be small stuff over time because it does not. There's because the truth is, it's like that. No creature actually, starts one way and immediate and one day is another thing.
Right.
Because again, if anything, all of this stuff is our classification of it based
Even
off.
the evolutionary tree that was so famous now that a lot of people are so familiar with is wrong now, and it's actually been redone into more of a almost like a free flow chart. It looks like a tree, but there are different cross sections where species actually breed and then they fade out, then they come back and breed again in our evolution of human history. And the Piltdown man just didn't fit into that. And for a long time, it was a forgery on science. It made the natural history. It made the British Museum look very, very, very stupid when they uncovered this,
And
and
Yeah.
it
yeah,
basically destroyed a lot of credibility. Of course, gave zealots and religious, fundamentalists more ammunition to say that
right.
evolution was a lie and
Yeah.
that it was blasphemy, and that a lot of famous fossils, and unfortunately, and on this podcast, we're going to talk about that, are fake. There is a
Yeah.
lot of famous fossils out there that are fake, and
Okay.
it is
But
it is it is part of what we lost because we lost a lot of time in science and research for people trying to do this stuff, trying to further these ideas. And there's one aspect of this story I want to mention too. They were looking all over at the time for different humanoid species in different parts of the world, except for, get this, Africa, because it was under the cultural belief that the first human and the first man could not have come from Africa. Of course, because of a series of archaeological racism at the
yeah,
time. I mean,
Yes.
this is something that is actually gone on quite
This
a
is
bit that a
still,
lot of people
yeah,
don't
it's
know
still
about.
going
There is,
on
yes,
now.
there's a lot of archaeological racism to from the ancient aliens theory to Piltdown man. In my personal opinion too, because they also wanted, France had Neanderthals. There was all these different discoveries happening all over the world. These different countries were finding their earliest human, but where was the missing link for Britain? And these guys basically wanted to be like, Britain was the cradle of human civilization.
which is
Britain was where the first man came from. It was the Englishman.
yeah,
And I truly believe that was one of their intentions to. And for a long time, they say that they weren't in on the hoax, but I thoroughly believe they all had to be. I mean, these guys even they found a dye kit in the museum with some of the bones that were actually
yeah.
found in the Piltdown man. But another huge fun theory is that W.P. Pycraft did it because of Sherlock Holmes, because this was a guy who was very spiritualist. He believed that, he believed in good jokes. He was known to be a jokester, and some people believe he actually faked this to fool the scientific community in a huge joke.
That'd be
And
fun.
he just kept it going till the end of his days.
And that's kind of how it's sort of what's happening now. It's not even sort of, it is what's currently happening. I think both you, Rob, and Luke are completely right. Luke, in your assessment that geological and scientifical breakthroughs within our research is in all of modern and ancient history doesn't go by leaps. There's a trickle down effect that happens with anything, especially when you're talking about Homo sapiens or any type of life forms that are connected to humanity. But when you make a conscious decision as I don't know, a geologist to find a bone that you don't know what it is, but then you kind of just for the sake of the lie, really, to say that this is connected to the humanity. The general consensus is, yeah, let's use this to propel, right? And it sounds stupid because then it's
Right.
a generational lie because we're all keeping these lies going. I mean, even still today, there are people that still believe in Piltdown Man. I just
I might want to
one of
mention
the things
too,
that are
the bones and everything that were for this were lost in World War II.
Yeah.
They were bombed out along with Caligula's boat.
Caligula's boat.
Yep, this is one of the losses of the museum. It's real. I totally think you're right on that too, Steve. I think it's a huge loss to science and history that they try to perplex this myth for so long. We do see it more and more. People there saying, "Hey, we see it with misinformation on the internet."
Yeah.
People writing these articles, then just kind of going with it and saying, "No, this is the fact now." And then it goes on and on to where so many people believe it, and then it almost becomes a fact. But realistically, it's not a fact.
But
But
even that though, Rob, just sorry to cut you off on that, but
No, go ahead.
just kind of to piggyback on what you were saying, it's basically true. The time and the consideration and research materials alone strengthens the lie more than the truth.
Right.
So if scientists are spending hundreds and hundreds and hundreds generational research and they find these bones, they can't possibly buy back into the truth of whether these bones are real or any type of geological breakthrough is real, rather than just saying that this is a lie. The time and research alone just doesn't allow it.
I understand what you're saying there, and see how they actually found out even more so that this was a lie. Is there's actually in the Piltdown quarry, there's a river that runs adjacent to it. So geographically, you okay, Luke?
Yeah.
So geographically, they were like, the timeline doesn't make sense because when you have a river there, there's going to be sediment deposits from, ancient times that are lower underground there. So how would this be? How would a hill, above a river have this human, this prehistoric human on it? And what's even more interesting, and I love how you brought up how long it takes to find these things, Steve, because this was my first kind of in my investigation into it. I really sat there and I said to myself, okay, so if Steve, if you were saying, hey Rob, I need you to find me, let's just say we're scientists, I need you to find me we need to find the earliest man. So I go up and I go to this quarry and I bring you back a skull and I'm like, there it is, boom, earliest man we found. And you're like, okay, well, in order for us to prove it more, we're gonna need a jawbone. I come back and I give you a jawbone. And then you're like, oh, well, you know what? We're still going to get criticism for this. If we only had a canine, then the next day I come back and I bring you a canine. In the work it takes to find these things, the odds and ends alone of finding the exact thing you need to complete your research and hypothesis is astronomical.
Yeah.
The idea that they were like, oh, we need a jawbone. Oh, we find the jawbone. Oh, we need to find this. Oh, we find that. I just don't know how anyone didn't ask that before. They were like, hey, dude, how are you finding exactly what I need? How come you didn't bring me back like a thigh bone or a hand bone? I asked specifically for a jaw. Cool, you found the jaw, but then I asked for the canine, and then you specifically found that.
Right.
It's a fraud. There's absolutely no way they all didn't realize something was up. So I don't know.
Yeah, I think it's just a generational thing, because you're right, Rob. Nobody, just the whole concept of just scientific finds like that behind geology and archaeologists, they can go their entire careers and never find anything. So to find things like that, and then like, okay, and then we found this, and then we also found this thing, and it's linking together. That's what kind of seals the deal for the lie, in my opinion. It's too convenient, especially for breakthroughs like this. But and it goes back to what Luke was saying. It's like, well, then it just strengthens the argument about like, how are you making these leaps and bounds and discoveries? That's linking humanity to one, like you said, prehistoric man on a hill that just wouldn't, even on another plane of science, just wouldn't make sense. It's interesting for sure.
It's really interesting too because now the census is that it was Charles Dawson who was part of it, that because he was the guy who was the one who was constantly finding the bones. He's the leading suspect in this whole this whole fraud, but I honestly think though it was all of them to a degree. I think as a researcher too, if you're a good one, if you're a good scientist and you always work backwards from your conclusion, and I don't mean that in a bad way. You sit there and say, I mean, you sit there and you go, what is my hypothesis? Now, this is my conclusion. How am I wrong though? Let me work backwards and go, how could I be wrong? Let me sit here and go, let me put holes in my own theory. And I'm pretty sure they had to have gone there and done that. I'm pretty sure some of them had to be like, well, we got this new thing in called a microscope. Let's go ahead and look at our Piltdown man. They had to have known. But for their own legacy and history, I think they literally continued to lie.
Yeah. You have to. It strengthens it. It just strengthens the lie, becomes more interesting, and it almost overtakes the truth because once you keep that lie going throughout history and throughout multiple historical institutions. The National History Museum, not a lot of people that are going to doubt that.
What's crazy too is that these guys even rebutted new findings of human remains. Like they were like, no, this is that you don't have them. We got the missing link. They literally had the audacity, even though if they weren't all in it, but and one person was in on it, they still had the lack of moral integrity to say to other scientists that had true findings, no, that's not really the missing link. This is the missing link. That's why I think they were in on it. That's why I think the whole thing, I don't think it was one person. I think they were all in on it. I mean, come on now. It's kind of hard to keep that a lie among a group that, is, I mean, do you guys, like, if we found something that big, don't you guys think you would check something I would do like that? Don't you think you would do your own research on it too? Steve, to write your own.
If it made famous, no.
If it's made famous, no.
If it made famous, no. Well, not first.
Yeah.
First.
Right. Yeah. It would depend. If it got if it got us real big, real quick, I would be like, if I keep my mouth shut, I might be able to ride this through.
Okay. Right. If we're all on if we're all scientists, like you're saying, Rob, and you made this just geological breakthrough, and it just blows up to what it is. I feel like all of us would come together and say, listen, we're all going to write pieces on this and kind of bring out theories. We're all just going to bring theories to this, but we're going to stick to the consensus that this is real. Then that breeds more curiosity, but it doesn't really make it so that it's fake. You know what I mean? You could just make it be like, well, here's more questions to what's behind these bones. And then that's how it just becomes, real. Yeah. Because it becomes the foundation.
I would very specifically not try to question it too much. Well, you know what? I would obviously do my due diligence, and if it felt like something was up, I would probably stop and be like, "Well, I'm just going to leave it at that."
You're the spokesperson, Rob. Don't worry, you're gonna go to the forefront for this.
Yeah. So if the shoe drops, I'll be like, "Well, I thought something might have been up." So I'm not the bad guy.
I would say it was all your idea.
Yeah. It may or it may not.
We would immediately turn on each other. That's why they're not sure who did it though. Because they were all like, "Oh, it was the other fucking guy. I didn't do it."
Yeah, it was the other dude.
Yeah.
What? That ain't my trunk. That ain't my trunk. Those ain't my bones in there. That ain't my black ink.
Yeah, right. True. Yeah. It just pushed it onto. Yeah, I wasn't the guy who dug it up.
Yeah.
The Fountain of Youth, a mythical spring, allegedly restores the youth of anyone who drinks or bathes in its waters. The Spanish explorer Juan Ponce de Leon, the first governor of Puerto Rico, was supposedly searching for the Fountain of Youth when he traveled to Florida in 1513.
All right, so speaking of digging up, here's an American myth I wanted to dig up that I think is kind of it's going to go in probably one of our first debunking our first kind of debunk on this show here, because that's what part of the show's about, is debunking myths and debunking legends, especially if they aren't outright true, from like Christopher Columbus setting foot into America. Here's another one that I think is a really good myth that I think a lot of people don't realize. So the Fountain of Youth, for many, I'm sure out there, some of our listeners out there in Florida, you go, "Oh, I know where that is. That's in St. Augustine, Florida." That's where the so-called Fountain of Youth was actually found. And I hate to tell you this, you're in fact wrong. There is no such journey that happened in the world. Explorer Juan Ponce de Leon never set out to find the Fountain of Youth. He actually set out to convert the natives and explore the Americas. Um, it's interesting how this story has taken such a huge leap in American culture and in like the world. Not to say that there aren't mythical springs that restore youth, because there are. Well, not literally, but there are supposedly, from the Lazarus pits to the mystical springs in Japan. Everywhere around the world supposedly has its own waters of youth-giving properties. But this is one that I always thought was weird, because we hear the story about the Aztecs telling them that this existed, yet the journey for it never it never happened. So I don't really have much else I can say to this story besides it just didn't happen. What is interesting is the tragic history of a lot of people who searched for the Fountain of Youth. Many people have died in search of it. What do you think about this story?
Yeah, therein lies the myth. Therein lies your mythos of how the Fountain of Youth became grandiose, and how like Ponce de Leon's name was kind of like tethered to that because of the explorers and the adventurers that set out and found the Fountain of Youth. There's been a lot of like, I don't know, more so like just talk between them and other travelers to the
Right.
Fountains of Youth that have just kind of, it was like hearsay, like any other myth, and that's how he was attached to some of the lore behind it, because they were like, oh yeah, he went and did this, and then it became, no, it wasn't him, but it was actually his cousin who went and found the Fountain of Youth and came back while
Right.
he was going and calling, like you were saying, like he was going and exploring, and so there was a lot
Converting the
of,
natives.
yeah, and there's a lot to that, to the myth of it, which is again just building on the whole concept of it. But it's an interesting thing of whether or not
There
the
is a
fountain
statue
exists.
of this is how much this myth has been perpetuated, Steve. Ponce de Leon, there's a statue of him in the plaza of Central Florida's oldest city, which is St. Augustine. Um, and there are apparently tens of thousands of visitors come every year to sample sulfur smelling well water.
That's
Apparently, it does not taste good.
oh,
Uh,
absolutely. That's when I
whatever.
go to Florida. You know, kids, want to go to Florida? Are we going to Disney World? Nope. We go to SeaWorld? Nope. We go to like I don't know, one of the beaches or something? Nope. Go to Central. We're gonna go to St. Augustine, place
St.
you never
Augustine.
heard of. Drink sulfur water.
I mean, what do you guys think
Yeah.
about the stories of Lazarus pits and the fountains of youth and streams? Do you think there's any truth to any of those things?
No, I mean like because that didn't they that was also with Cortez that he was trying to find El Dorado, the city of gold. It's like no, Ponce de Leon was not trying to find the fountain of youth. Cortez was not trying to find the city of gold. They were just trying to find land and people to enslave. That was
Right.
the goal. That was all you needed back then. You didn't need magic. It was when you were a colonial superpower, that was how that's how you did it.
That's
You're
how
like,
you
oh,
ran things.
you
You
just
go
find land
around
and slaves.
converting and enslaving anybody. You don't want to convert to Christianity? Then hell, you're our slave.
Yeah, you're
Yeah.
a slave. Yeah.
Yeah, no, oh yeah, and also the Holy Grail. That's another one too. That's all, you know. Supposedly people search for that. And of course,
It's found. They
Yeah.
actually found the Holy Grail.
They found.
That's
Yeah.
actually we're gonna cover that another episode. But yeah, it's actually in Spain. And by saying that it's the Holy Grail, what I mean by that is it is the only item. It's in the Valencia Cathedral House,
Yeah.
and it's the Holy Chalice. And basically they've done the dating of it. They have found out that the piece of wood, which is actually the real cup, is from the real time of Jesus. This is the only artifact in history that actually has receipts to where it has been connecting it from the Holy Land and Jerusalem all the way to its current location. And it was in
That's so
Rome
intact.
itself. and it's
And
still
it's still
intact.
intact. Yeah.
Interesting. Which is again, well, that's I mean, we'll probably get into that situation because again, the actual genealogical information on Jesus is very, very thin outside of the Bible.
You think
Like,
so?
yeah, we have very, yeah, I mean, like obviously we have a lot of this stuff about him, by Christians after his death,
Mm-hmm.
but stuff about his life, like,
Oh, okay.
as in like I mean even in terms of his execution, we don't have like any logs of like we don't have transcripts
We have
of
the sign, the piece of the true
Yeah.
cross, where the Romans because they put. Help me out, Luke, because I know you're a little bit more in
uh,
tune with the religious, more with the
the
history.
Byzantine stuff. I'm a little bit off. But what was it?
But they said like when they crucified him, they put it was in Hebrew, uh,
Would have been
Latin,
would have
and it
been
was like it said, "Here's Jesus,
Here's
King of the
Jesus.
Jews," and they
Okay.
wrote that in 3 different languages above the cross, and
Okay. So
they
we have
have
that.
that.
Okay, so
They
we have that. Okay.
they
But yeah,
have
but like in terms of like stuff about like, any logs of like the Roman guards reporting of like this was executed today, any of the because again, it was an extensive trial. We don't have any record of his trial
right,
outside of the
Right.
Bible.
and
So
Romans
the cup is
documented a lot.
curious. So but that kind of stuff. I'm the one that interests me, though. Again, this is getting into a tangent. Is the Ark of the Covenant because
We
we
can
have
get into it.
there's
We
the
can get into
theory
it.
that I forget what the village is, but there's supposedly
Ethiopia,
is it Ethiopia? It
right?
is a whole village, but again, it is they refuse people. They essentially you cannot go in. They do
Right.
not allow outsiders are not allowed to see it. They get and as far as we know, it probably isn't even
It's
that.
in Menelik, and it was from the son of the Queen of Sheba and King Solomon of Israel after Jerusalem was sacked in 1586, 1587 BC. After Solomon's temple was destroyed.
Yeah.
Supposedly, that's where they took the Ark of the Covenant. But I'm sorry to interrupt, Luke. Go ahead and finish your thought.
As we know, it probably isn't much at this point because supposedly the Romans stripped the Ark of all the gold when they conquered the area. So it
Interesting.
is most
I hadn't heard that one.
yeah.
Yeah.
And here's my biggest thing, and this is why we've also started this podcast to get some of these some of these thoughts I would say out there because this is my whole ploy on it because I'm a very spiritual person, and I believe that in a world right now where religious faith is so low, why would you hide such an important relic to believers?
Yeah.
Why would you sit there if you have it, then show it? Or anything. I know that we all know the myth that we're all going to turn into skeletons like Indiana Jones here.
Uh-huh.
But the
So,
point of the matter is though is that if you have it, show it. Like they say, it ain't tricking if you got it. Well, stop doing the trick and stop telling people that you have something that's so important to faith if you really don't. And
Yeah,
again,
but
it kind of
it
it
goes
goes
into
to
that.
Piltdown Man almost. It goes
Yeah.
into keeping the story alive to keep said legacies alive.
Yeah, and it's also derivative based entirely on faith, where you don't actually need to see, you don't need to actually see any type of proof. You don't need to see any identification to strengthen one resolve
But
within
that's all it
something like
is,
that
man.
within
And see,
Christianity.
that's where I'll push back at you, Steve, because Jesus had to give proof. Jesus
yeah.
had to give proof that he was the
That's
Son of
true.
God. So why won't you give proof that faith is real? You
Yeah,
see what I'm
so
saying?
you should just know because
I get
it's
it.
a
It's a
bigger,
leap of faith.
bigger.
Yeah,
It's
I
a
think
leap of faith.
to
Yeah.
also to note is that Ethiopia is the birthplace of Zoroastrianism, which is itself sort of an offshoot of Christianity, like not 100%, but like Zoroastrianism has a lot of roots in Christian, in Christian lore.
Hmm.
Uh, so that could also play a factor into why they claim they have the Ark of the Covenant. It could be something that they are trying to tie uh, into because again, it's very hard to these artifacts because they were not again they were not preserved well because uh,
The Romans like to sack everything.
like the sacrifice the Jew and Israelites and Jews were repeatedly, removed from their homes, had all of their cultural sites repeatedly destroyed over centuries by different empires again and again and again and again. So what we probably have is, only the stuff that we were able to, that's been meticulously preserved or just by pure luck. So,
I agree and disagree, because I'm a guy that, I understand that, we say we got to have that leap of faith, but I'm also at the point of where I think faith is almost becoming lackluster, and I know that's hard to say, but for some
yeah.
people, you have to see it,
Uh-huh.
and that's me.
According to Chinese mythology, the goddess of the palace near Zai Wang Mu, the wife of the Jade Emperor and the patron saint of Taoist sages, called the Immortals, was growing a peach tree. She revered this tree for its significance as a source of immortality. These fruits are believed to confer onto those who ate them immortality, similar to the golden apples in the Garden of the Hesperides, as found in Greek mythology.
It's an interesting another, I guess, relic you could say, and that is the peaches of immortality from China.
Peaches
So
of immortality.
yes, supposedly the peaches of immortality um, were peaches that were grown by the empress, and they took over. Give me just a second here. They took over, and there was basically it said that there's a variety of these peaches. Tiny blossom allows those who eat it to feel their bodies are both light and strong. This variety is said to open up one's mind to higher wisdom and lengthen one's life. These peaches blossom every 3,000 years. The sweeter variety with multiple blossoms is rarer, blossoming every 6,000 years. And the third variety, the most extraordinary, are the peaches of immortality that have purple streaks, and their stones are pale yellow, and they ripen 9,000 years, and whoever eats them lives eternally and enjoys the rank of equal to that of the sun and the moon, which are actual living beings in Chinese mythology. It was said that the Queen Mother would send out invitations to summon, basically those who were worthy enough to. Well, he sent out fairies to collect the peaches, which, there you go on that story. But it was actually kind of like a ceremony for those who could eat them. And the Ming Dynasty was part of that. There's poems that describe the peaches, blossoming fruit that stays ripe for 1,000 years, lingering on with no summer or winter fears. It is said that the emperors who ate this fruit lived long, long lives. And yeah, this is an interesting story because we don't have anybody who's currently living
Yeah.
from those ages.
Right.
Although, I'm sure many know, just looking and googling up Chinese emperors, it is said they lived for long periods of time,
Uh-huh.
which is even more interesting.
Well,
But
longer than the average human
but
around that time.
also funny enough, though, they were also eating mercury tablets, especially the
That
the
is,
first
yeah,
the first Chinese emperor, who that's pretty much how he died. And they
yeah,
were
yeah.
always after the search of immortality. This is actually very common in Chinese culture, is the search to live forever.
Forever.
Yeah,
Um,
and yeah,
so what do you guys think of this story? I think it's a really interesting one. I would also like to note that peaches are actually the representation of life and life-giving properties in China. So a peach represents longevity, basically.
That's cool. Yeah, peaches are nice. No, I mean, it's more than likely because, around that time, especially compared to medieval, I guess to Europe at the same time, I don't think it would necessarily just be medieval times, but like China had a vastly higher standard of living uh, than medieval Europe. So I can believe that with hygiene and diets and and the way their cities and towns were structured to be much less disease ridden. I can definitely believe that people lived longer compared to other people at the time there, especially if they were royalty.
Interesting. And peaches were kind of a royal, delicacy among royalty. I like that. I like how the idea. I like what you said there because yes, people dying in Europe was actually far more common than people dying in the uh, around the cultural China because yeah, it was let's just be honest, a matter of hygiene. This is what was one of the causes of the Black Death in Europe so bad because it wiped out most of the lower class peasant folk
Exactly.
that were very unhygienic. Um, but yeah, I think that's an interesting point because peaches again are the symbol of longevity in China, and the fact that people might live longer in China than they did in Europe is a very, very good, interesting point. I like that. Steve, what do you got to say about that?
Yeah, I agree. It's also a symbol of the their plane of existence and their consciousness because the religious aspect in ancient China and Chinese mythology was tied to the spiritual plane of existence and the mental fortitude of the people that were studying it. So like having the peaches of immortality be this symbol of a greater beyond is pretty acceptable when you think about it because then there's also more stuff that goes along with this myth of the pits were somehow preserved and
Right.
they were trying to regrow these within the not
I'm
the
glad
modern
you brought.
era.
I was just gonna get to that. Yeah, they actually say they do have the peach core
Yeah,
still. That is something
yeah.
that is very interesting.
So
And
there's a trace back, quote unquote, to that they can. Oh no, these things did exist, and we're it again. It just goes back to, in my opinion, to the plane of existence of trying to see if there's it's not technically immortality because obviously they're not alive, but
and
to
what-
live longer than people did around then, linked to this fruit is definitely interesting.
And what's interesting too, Steve, is that the peach pits apparently were carved into amulets, and this is something in China I'm reading. Peach pits are carved into amulets and given to children to protect them to ensure long life. In the novel Journey to the West, the Monkey King achieved eternal life by stealing the peaches of immortality from the garden of the Queen Mother of the West just before she hosted the banquet of all the immortals.
Nice.
Yep.
Yep.
Yeah.
So apparently, only 2 humans have tasted the peaches of immortality. The myth goes so far as into Greek lore as well. The Greeks apparently have learned about this. The orchid of the Chinese goddess is they're known as celestial peaches. That is something that they call them. It's really interesting because God, China just has so much interesting lore. Like I don't know. When I first read the story, the way I discovered this was actually in mythical plants. Um, Basically, I was looking for like plants that they say that used to exist. One of them is the Madagascar tree-eating plant, and then I came across this, which was the peaches of immortality, um, in the same story as one that said it to possibly be a hoax. But yeah, I think it's just a really interesting story to share.
Yeah,
Yeah,
this is an interesting one. I just like how it goes back to just like trying
life.
to life and death as well because it's obviously trying to extend the humanity's lifespan and seeing if there's an actual like can your consciousness survive the plane of death? Can you be aware that you're dead and somehow I don't know, just live in the ether because there's also within ancient Chinese lore, or you know what I mean, there's also this thing where the warriors would, it's kind of like Valhalla sort of deal where they die and their plane of existence goes to this place of happiness, whether it be your representation of heaven or whatever it may be, but there's always that thing of like your subconscious leaving your body and it goes into the ether and what's beyond that ether, you know what I mean? So these peaches of immortality are kind of sort of connected to that.
I would also like to point out the person that is said to have eaten one of the peaches of immortality was Sun Wukong, which was also in the story of the Journey to the West. what was this? What was the saddest story though that you guys read about this one? What was the story that was most interesting to you guys on this episode? This is just back footage.
I would say
Oh, we got 5 minutes.
yeah, the Great Auk. I think that's sad.
Yep.
Yeah.
Same.
Yeah, me too. When I
hated
found out that
story, man.
penguins weren't really penguins, I was like, "What the fuck?" And then I read more into it. I'm like, "That's how, man, that's sad that culture just kind of wrote off these birds, and they were like, nah, these are penguins now, whatever."
Or
It was
humans. Don't you love how they always do this thing where they're just like, penguins aren't really penguins, but they're the cousins of
Right.
the great. It's like, why does it always have to be a cousin? It's just like, it's some bird that you're just trying to link to it because it looks the same, but it's
Right.
not technically the bird. So it's just sad, dude.
Yeah, it's
hate
really
that.
sad. It's like trying to almost morally compensate for the fact that they're gone almost. You know what I mean?
Sorry, we just.
Well, yeah, and
this
again,
bird.
it all goes back to how all of the species category that's us. That's us putting all of the creatures. Obviously, we have to differentiate a bird from a wolf because it's those are clearly different things. But then you get into the specifics, and it starts to get a little more the ox and penguins, which are all different. But yeah.
I think the one that interests me that I was really kind of disturbed, of course, was Mary Shelley's. That one really kind of got me.
Yeah. No, for the record, I think that one's fake. I think.
Well, it came from her biographer. That's what makes it interesting. Yes, her biographers wrote that shit.
Yeah,
It's still iffy
again,
though, Rob.
I can't. I don't know. I feel like
I get you. And you know what? You have some credibility to that because me and Steve have been researching this subject since we started this episode, and the only thing I was able to find was the medical journal in which she wrote in.
Same.
I could not find
I did too.
anything else besides that article and the medical journal in which it stated that she wrote the procedure in. That was it.
Did you see that theory about Frankenweenie was a nod to that?
Oh, that's what me and Luke were talking about.
Yeah, I was reading that too.
I can believe that she did maybe she did surgery on the dog, some sort of vivisection or something when it was dead. I don't think it came back to life. I don't know. I don't think it's so
true.
It's alive. It's alive. I can believe a disrespectful biographer said that based off her reputation in the literary world. I feel like I can believe, but again, ultimately we'll never know because any sort of unless we get unless one or two other people in her life at that time.
Right.
We like some verification, oh yeah, Mary Shelley did that. Then we can maybe
totally there. Yeah.
I guess the only thing that the key thing that gets me off is, or not gets me off. Well, yeah, maybe because it's super hot actually. But no, the only thing that the key thing that is putting me off the story is the procedure itself, which sounds super crude. It's I don't think any creature would survive that, especially because I can absolutely believe that Mary Shelley would not have been the first person to try this. And as near as I can tell, when people would try that thing is dead. Those creatures are dead.
I agree. It's a very good argument. Very, very good argument. I am not even going to fight you on that because I think it's crazy. Yeah. The Piltdown Man one too is, to me, I'm the one that actually everyone says it's one dude. I think it was all of them. I think it was all of them.
Yeah, I mean there was a similar, and it happened similarly with the Brontosaurus, because they thought it was, remember? Because they had the Brachiosaurus and the Apatosaurus.
Oh, that's right.
They thought the Brontosaurus was its own thing. Now that was more of just that was more just stubbornness, where they found this and they immediately went to the
younger version of it, right?
They were like, oh, this is another thing, and then eventually they were like, no, it's probably just what you probably just got the bones mixed up.
The same thing with the Triceratops. Right now, they're saying the Triceratops isn't a real dinosaur because they don't find.
That's going to make people sad. That's going to be
because they think it's actually a young version of a Torosaurus.
Of a Torosaurus, yeah. That's going to make people sad. That's going to be a Pluto. That's going to be a Pluto's not a planet thing. Be like, sorry.
Oh my god, dude.
Sorry, kids. You like those Triceratops? You love those Triceratops? You got yourself your steak. fuck off. You're wrong. It can't happen anymore. You're looking at a lie. You're looking at a lie.
You're living a lie.
Just look at some kid with a stuffed stegosaurus and like, you were built on a tower of lies.
So episode 2, Luke, is going to be the Bronze Age collapse. It's going to be collapse.
Yeah.
That's going to be fun. We're going to talk about the Sea People, the Bronze Age, the Wolf Super PAC. I want to talk about the Archaeopteryx forgery.
Okay.
So we're going to talk about that. When we get into episode 3, I want to just let you know how they're going to be. I have on there the Wendell Johnson monster experiment. Read that shit. That shit is cruel.
Okay.
This dude like destroyed orphans' lives. The Montreal experiment is a part of MK Ultra. That this dude like wiped people's minds out.
Yeah.
In episode 4, I'm still writing, but basically I don't know if you've ever heard of the coronavisor. It's basically the Vatican time machine.
Okay.
And there's also the Spirit Com, which you know what a ghost box is?
That's the one. It lets you talk to ghosts.
Yes, this is the first version of that.
First version. Okay.
Yeah,
Cool.
and this guy made like VHS tapes of him talking
If
supposedly to a doctor that built that.
Yeah. If we're doing Bronze Age next week, I can do I can't do Thursday, but I think I should be good Wednesday or Friday. So
Okay. Just we'll figure it out.
Yeah, we'll figure that out. Hey, Rob, I got another one for you. I'll let you know on it. But I've been researching a bunch of like Elephant Man.
Ooh.
Ooh, Elephant Man, that's great.
That one's
Elephant
good,
Man.
dude. There's so much like stuff that like I knew there was a ton of it, but there's like, was Jack the Ripper, this Joseph Merrick guy? I'm just like, are you kidding me?
What?
Yeah. There's a
fair.
theory that there's Jack the Ripper's.
John Merrick, he couldn't move properly.
Right.
Yeah, he couldn't
God,
do
he's still
anything.
taking shit and death. My
Yeah.
God.
Yeah.
Poor dude.
I think he did die because he
He tried to sleep like like normal people.
Yeah. And
also,
God, dude.
how he also didn't have the use of one of his hands.
Right.
They explicitly said that Jack the Ripper probably had some medical trait. Like you can't do that as John Merrick.
Yeah, they were saying like Jack. That's what I'm saying. It's like they were saying.
Could you
Jack the
imagine
Ripper had
if it was
a
him?
like a body
Could you-
deformity or something. It's like
you
it's
imagine?
automatically the Elephant Man being Jack the Ripper.
Could you imagine him dressing up every night?
Yeah, exactly. Or you're also. Can you also just imagine nobody being able to say like, what the fuck is that?
Yeah, I know, right? That's what I'm thinking. How is he supposed to kill these women and get away without anybody seeing?
Night, you just see this shadowy figure like,
What is that? He's moving slowly towards me anyways. Right?
He's just waddling, just kind of like much-legged away. And they were like, what did he look like? I have no idea.
I have no idea.
I don't think exactly. They couldn't have just been like, well, in the shadow, his head was this big. And I don't think the cop. Listen, I have no. Obviously, cops were probably even worse back then. So,
it's a real thing.
Okay, please bring that up.
They have
I
that.
would love to
It's called the suspects. Look up the suspect guy.
I think someone
Joseph
just threw
Merrick.
that in there, like in the
think
park
so?
in Batman.
'Cause I
When they're
think-
like, "Who's Batman?" They have that picture of Bigfoot. I think someone just threw that shit up there. Like,
yeah.
Have you seen this man? It's just like a stick figure, and then have you seen this man? Dude,
okay,
I
I
can't believe that.
Right.
Oh, man.
Oh,
Yeah.
that's fucking great, Steve. Yeah, please send me that. All right. I'll talk to you guys later. That made my night. I'm going to be thinking about that
That's
now all
good.
day. Excuse me, madam. Would you step into the shadows with me?
Yeah.
And then I'm thinking of Johnny Depp's From Hell. Could you imagine?
Oh, yeah.
God.
Okay, I'm going to go now. I'll talk to you guys
Okay.
later, man. Later.
Right. Peace out, guys.
Okay.